Hello, everybody. I recently posted a video about reactive abuse. It was a pretty short video, definitely not long enough to even come close to getting into the topic in the way that uh, a topic like that really warrants, because it's very complex and nuanced. However, I was really encouraged by the amount of comments and conversations that uh, happened after posting that video. And so I wanted to come back on to do two things. One, just to acknowledge that and say thank you, and that that's helpful for me to know that I'm talking about things that feel relevant to you and that could use more discussion. And I also noticed that there were quite a few themes coming up uh, throughout the comments that were directly and indirectly related to reactive abuse. So that's helpful in a couple ways. It tells me other topics that are super important that I can talk more about. Um, and it also tells me where you're at in your experience. So whether you have previously or currently been dealing with any kind of an abusive situation, dealing with a high conflict partner, these are all themes that are super relevant to you and to everyone else in your situation. And so I really appreciate all of those themes that were brought up throughout the comments as well. And so, uh, yeah, I wanted to mention a couple things. One is thank you for commenting. Um, Very helpful to me and to other people, definitely. And so I will be coming back to the topic of reactive abuse more fully, through the lens of high conflict custody situations, since that is where I am specializing my content for the most part. There's a lot of overlap, but since that is the lens that I am specializing in, I'll be talking about reactive abuse more through that lens specifically coming up shortly. And then for this video, I wanted to briefly go over just the main themes I saw coming up through the comments that were made. And I do also plan on coming back to those more thoroughly because they all could be, multiple videos all on their own. But just to briefly acknowledge the different perspectives that were coming up and encourage you all to continue posting because, as I said, super helpful to me, super helpful to others. One of the themes I saw was kind of a little bit of a debate about accountability versus an excuse. So that makes sense. Depending on where you're coming from, what your personal experience is like, I can see how that perspective could kind of veer both ways, whether you're more inclined to see reactive abuse as something that is used as an excuse by people who uh, are in a situation that is not healthy to be in, but have not been able to leave yet. So, tons of reasons why that may be the case. That leads into my second point, which is just the complexities that are involved in deciding to leave an abusive situation. So many things to mention there. So I do want to come back to that concept of accountability and, well, the differences between reactive abuse being talked about through the lens of awareness, let's say. I think awareness is a lot more kind and compassionate term to use. Um, but accountability, it was also a word that I believe was specifically used in the comments, so I will reference that. Um, yeah, abuse of any kind is never okay. So just to put that out there, it's not okay ever. However, there are differences um, in the way that abusive behaviors can originate. Um, like I said, complex, and which is why I think it is so important to talk about it, because allowing yourself to be in a situation without knowing your limits and without knowing, having that self-awareness to know how you're behaving and getting help before you are engaging in reactive abuse, if possible, is important. Not just for yourself, but especially if kids are in the picture. It's important on so many levels, not just in your current day-to-day survival, but also looking down the road to getting out of that situation, the next stages that come after that. A lot of it is going to be based on what happened prior to leaving. So that's why my passion for helping people prepare to be in that stage comes from, because when you're in the situation, it seems like all that matters is, can I leave? Should I leave? Have I done everything that I possibly can do? Am I going to regret this later? Am I making the right decision for my kids? How am I going to survive? There's so many questions, and it comes down to a when do I do it? And that's the biggest thing, because that's really all you can, that is all you can really take on at that moment. It's such a big decision. Just the mental struggle that goes on for so long leading up to being in a position where you can leave or you feel that you're ready to leave. And so it's understandable that you don't know what comes next until you get there. And knowing what comes next from someone who has been there is extremely helpful and sets you up a lot better in the long run, for the next part of the custody process if you share kids with someone, which is, more specifically what I'm focused on is leaving a situation with a high conflict partner whom you share kids with, and knowing what to expect after you leave, and knowing that everything you do leading up to the point of leaving matters. It comes with you. It is a paper trail. It can be used against you later on. So it's really important to have an awareness of, really, throw out the term reactive abuse for a minute, because that's very heavy. Just knowing how a commissioner in a courtroom looks at things, what they look for in terms of patterns, how they define high conflict, the types of things that matter to them, because it's a lot harder than it should be to prove abuse. And it's a lot harder than it should be to prove who is the instigator of that abuse, who has the most power and control in the situation previously and currently, because power and control don't stop just because you leave the relationship. That's another thing that's super important to know about. I will be doing another video about that as well. I already have that in mind, um, because that's related and very important and will be helpful to know about for yourself as you move into the next phase of figuring out your next steps and planning and preparing. So, all that to say, there were comments on both sides of the spectrum having to do with, is reactive abuse real? Is it just a way to avoid accountability? Is it just an excuse? Is all abuse the same? Things like that. Definitely worth coming back to in a more in-depth video about reactive abuse. As I already touched on, another theme that came up in the comments was just the complexities of leaving a situation like that. I don't think I need to get too much into it right now. I think you all are the type of audience who understands that pretty well already. But just to restate what some of you already said, just leaving or the advice to just leave is often extremely oversimplified and can actually do a lot of harm to someone who feels unable to for various reasons or is unable to for various reasons. Abusive relationships are commonly very isolating. And so a person who's been in one long enough may not have enough of a support system practically to lean on for those initial steps of getting out of a relationship. Just as one example, that's not the only example, but that's just one. Isolation is very common, and often people who have been in manipulative, controlling, narcissistic type relationships for a long time have often been so worn down and had their reality, you know, questioned. You want to use another hot topic term of gaslighting. Things like that happen. People start to doubt their own reality. They start to question themselves. They start to invalidate themselves because it's being done to them. And so often people who are in these situations are so worn down and have been in a pattern of invalidating themselves that that extra layer of invalidation coming from external sources, people who don't even know them, can do a lot more damage than you might realize. Um, so again, that was another theme that came up in the comments, just uh, the various reasons why it might be difficult for someone to leave a situation like that, which I think definitely deserves more discussion in another video. Uh, the flip side of that is that, yes, while it is difficult or impossible in some situations, it, my perspective and what a lot of others seem to share as well is how difficult it is to truly begin healing from that type of trauma while you're still living in it. So I believe there are lots of things you can do to cope. There are a lot of things you can do to work on your own mental health, to focus on the right things, which if you have kids, that's number one. Uh, but as long as you are living in that cycle, your nervous system is ultimately going to have a really hard time feeling safe. And so it will be difficult to ever really heal and become the best version of yourself for as long as you're still in the situation that's causing that kind of harm and undermining your progress. So that was another topic that came up. Third one was the concept of whether victim and abusers swap roles. I don't want to talk about that too much right now because it is a big topic. Um, but there was some debate about that. Some people said, you know, uh, more along the lines of, reactive abuse not really being a thing, let's say, and that people can swap roles between victim and abuser, and you can equally participate in that dynamic, taking on one role or another depending on the day. That's a little oversimplified, I would say, which I think most people agreed with. A lot of people were very strongly of the opinion that role swapping does not happen at all. Um, it is important to come back to the main idea, which is kind of at the heart of this whole discussion, which is the difference between intentional manipulation, intentional control, intentional harm over a period of time. So a pattern of behavior over a period of time compared to, I think it was called by someone in the comments, a trauma-driven reaction. And so that is definitely something to get back into more later. This concept of swapping roles, does that happen? Does it not happen? How does that relate to the overall message? Like, what do we do with that information? Because my whole point to talking about this at all is how does awareness, how does knowledge help you? How does it help you become more empowered, more strategic, um, more prepared to take the next steps that are needed to take care of yourself and take care of your kids and limit the amount of additional harm and abuse that continues along the way. Someone also mentioned the importance of emotional boundaries and healing. Definitely agree with that. Boundaries are huge for me. I will be talking extensively about boundaries and communication, specifically through the lens of high conflict custody. So I will be coming back to that. Let's see. Looking at my notes here because I wanted to make sure that I remembered a lot of these themes that you all brought up. Another one had to do with the severity and the danger of the narcissistic abuse. Just being aware of the amount of damage and destruction that can be caused, not to um, underestimate essentially what individuals who have these behaviors can do. I 100% agree with that. If you've seen patterns, expect them to become worse after you leave the relationship. That is the safest way to proceed. I will talk more about that for sure. And let's see, I have mentioned patterns. It looks like someone else mentioned patterns oh right, yes. So abusers can act differently in public versus in private. That is a huge topic. Which I think in the context of these comments had to do with describing how the manipulation that often occurs is intentional. So again, there's a difference between, I won't get into it again uh, under the umbrella of reactive abuse right now. However, when it comes to taking care of yourself, it's just important to know where you're at and where the other person is at. Are they consistently doing things that hurt you, even though you've made attempts to communicate, you've shared the impact that their behaviors have on you many, 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 many times, and their behavior doesn't change over time because they have no interest in changing it. That's kind of what you're looking for. You're looking for patterns. And see, there's some discussion about going no contact. Yeah, we can come back to that as well. Yeah, I think that's, well, let me know if I missed anything. There's definitely big overarching themes and subjects to come back to for sure. So thank you all again for taking the time to comment, letting me know if you found the video helpful. I know it was short, it couldn't have been more than maybe a 10 or 12-minute video. So the fact that it was helpful to you or sparked that type of discussion is very encouraging to me. Like I said, I plan on making more videos covering all these topics and a lot more. And I am paying attention to the comments and what you all say, and am looking forward to chatting with you all more. So thank you again, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.